Zara was busy cleaning the grand hall of the mansion when she heard the sound of a spaceship landing. She quickly straightened up and turned her attention to the large windows. The tall, shining doors of the mansion slowly opened, and the ship's engines turned off. Zara felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. Today was the day a human was arriving. Zara had been working in this mansion for many years, but she had never met a human before. She had heard stories about them, how they were different from her people. The elders always spoke of humans with a kind of mystery, but no one really knew what to expect. Were they kind? Cruel? Zara wasn't sure. She quickly brushed off the dust from her uniform and adjusted her gloves. As a maid, Zara was trained to serve the guests who visited the mansion. The rich and powerful from different alien worlds came to stay, but today felt different. Zara couldn't shake the feeling that this human would be unlike any guest she had ever met. The doorbell rang, and Zara took a deep breath. She walked quickly to the entrance. The grand doors opened, revealing a man standing in front of her. He was tall, with short brown hair and a calm expression. He wore simple clothes, which surprised Zara. Most guests wore much more extravagant outfits. His eyes, however, caught her attention the most. They were deep and full of warmth, unlike the cold eyes of most other aliens. "Hello," the man said in a gentle voice. "You must be Zara." Zara stood still for a moment. She was used to formal greetings, but this felt different. "Yes, I am," she replied, her voice soft. "Welcome to the mansion. I will take you to your room." The man smiled and nodded. "Thank you. My name is John. It's nice to meet you." Zara stepped aside and motioned for John to enter. As he passed, she noticed how tall he was, almost towering over her, but there was something in his posture that made him seem approachable. Zara led him through the grand hallway, her mind racing with thoughts about him. Humans were so different from her own kind, and she had heard stories that they could be very unpredictable. "Is your planet always so quiet?" John asked as they walked. Zara was a little surprised by the question. Most guests never ask her anything beyond the basics. "Yes," she said, glancing at him. "Our planet is peaceful, but it can get loud during festivals." John smiled. "That sounds nice. I've never been to a place like this. It's calming." Zara nodded. She was used to the silence, but she hadn't thought about it in the way John described. "I'm glad you like it," she said. "This way, please." As they walked to his room, Zara noticed that John seemed very at ease. Most guests were either excited or impatient to settle in, but John seemed calm and content. She led him to a large room with a beautiful view of the gardens outside. "Here we are," Zara said, opening the door. "This is your room." John walked inside and placed his bag down. "Thank you, Zara," he said again, his voice still warm and sincere. "I appreciate your kindness." Zara felt a strange warmth in her chest. No guest had ever thanked her like that before. She had always been treated as just a maid, someone who was expected to do her job without question. But John didn't seem to see her that way. He looked at her as if she was someone important. It was a strange feeling, one that Zara couldn't quite understand. "You're welcome," she said quietly, before turning to leave. "Please let me know if you need anything." But before she could step out, John spoke again. "Actually, Zara, could I ask you something?" Zara turned back to face him. "Yes. Could you join me for a meal later? I've been traveling for a long time, and I would like some company." Zara blinked, surprised. This was unusual. Guests usually preferred to dine alone or with other high-ranking individuals. They never asked the servants to join them. She hesitated for a moment. I am not sure if that is appropriate, sir." John smiled again, his eyes full of kindness. "Please call me John. And it's perfectly fine. I would just like to get to know you better. If you're not busy, of course." Zara felt a small, odd flutter in her chest. She had never been invited to eat with a guest before, let alone one who seemed so kind. She had heard stories of how humans could be cold and distant, but this man was different. "Very well," Zara said softly. "I will be happy to join you for dinner, John." John nodded and smiled. "I'll see you then." "Thank you." Zara left the room, still thinking about the strange request. What had made him want to eat with her? It wasn't normal. But at the same time, Zara couldn't deny the curiosity that filled her. Something about this human felt different, something she couldn't explain. She knew one thing for sure. This week was going to be unlike any other she had experienced, and she couldn't wait to see what would happen next. A new feeling. Zara spent the next few days serving John, the human guest, and something began to change inside her. At first, she had been nervous, unsure of how to treat him or what he might want. But now, as the days passed, she started to feel comfortable around him. There was something about John that made her forget all the rules she had been taught. She no longer just saw him as a guest to serve. She saw him as someone different. Each day, she would bring him his meals and make sure his room was spotless. But each time, John would smile at her, and they would talk for a few minutes. At first, their conversations were small, talking about the weather, his travels, and his life on Earth. But over time, the conversations grew longer. John would ask her questions about her planet, her culture, and even her dreams. Zara was surprised by how much he seemed to care. No one had ever asked her about her thoughts and feelings before. Most guests treated her like she was invisible, just someone who cleaned and served. But John made her feel like she mattered. He would listen carefully, nodding when she spoke, and sometimes even sharing his own thoughts. One evening, after a long day of work, Zora brought John his dinner. As she set the food on the table, she looked at him and felt a strange warmth in her chest. John was sitting at the table, looking at her with his calm, kind eyes. "Zara," John said, breaking the silence, "you're always so kind and polite. It's not often I meet someone like you. How do you stay so calm all the time?" Zara blinked, surprised by the question. "I don't know," she replied quietly. "I've always been like this. It's part of who I am." John smiled and pushed his plate aside. "I can see that. You seem different from other people I've met. You don't have that coldness that many others do." Zora didn't know how to respond. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. In her culture, maids were supposed to stay in the background and never draw attention to themselves. But here, in John's presence, she felt noticed. She felt seen. "I'm not used to this," Zara said, looking down at her hands. "Most guests just want their food and don't speak much to me." John reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "I'm not like most guests," he said gently. "I'm happy to talk to you, Zara. You're more than just a maid to me." Zara's heart skipped a beat. His touch was warm and comforting, and for a moment, she forgot where she was. She didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that. She had spent her whole life serving others, always staying out of the way, never thinking about her own needs. But now, with John's kindness, everything seemed different. I don't know what to say," Zara whispered. "I've never had anyone speak to me like that before." John smiled and squeezed her hand gently. "That's because you're special, Zara. You deserve more than just being someone's servant." Zara felt a rush of emotions she didn't understand. Her heart was racing, and she felt a strange tightness in her chest. It was as if she had been living her whole life in a quiet, dark room, and suddenly, the door had been opened, letting in the light. "Thank you," Zora said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm just doing my job." "You don't have to see it that way," John replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't have to be just a maid. You can be whatever you want to be." Zora looked down at the table, feeling a mix of emotions. She had always been taught that her place was to serve, that her worth came from doing her job well. But here, in John's presence, she began to wonder if there could be more to her life than just this. She spent the rest of the evening in a daze, thinking about John's words. She couldn't stop replaying the conversation in her mind. You can be whatever you want to be. Could it be true? Could she really change her life? Could she be more than just a servant? The next day, as Zara worked in the garden, she couldn't help but think about John again. She had never felt this way before, confused, excited, and a little scared. She wasn't sure what these feelings meant, but they were growing stronger each day. Every time she saw John, her heart would race, and she couldn't help but wonder if he felt the same way. That afternoon, as she brought him his afternoon tea, she noticed that John was looking at her differently. His eyes were softer, warmer. He smiled when he saw her, and there was something in his smile that made Zora's stomach flip. "Zora," John said as she set the tea down, "I was thinking, maybe we could go for a walk in the garden later, just the two of us." Zora's breath caught in her throat. A walk with John. Alone. She hadn't expected that. It was such a simple request, but it sent a wave of excitement through her. I would like that," Zora said, her voice barely above a whisper. John smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, Zora saw something in his eyes that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, he saw her as something more than just a maid. She felt a rush of hope and wonder. As she left the room, Zora couldn't stop smiling. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like anything was possible. Zora's inner struggle. Zora couldn't stop thinking about John. Every time she saw him, her heart raced. The way he looked at her, the way he spoke to her, it was all so new, so different. But it also made her feel confused. Was it possible for her, a maid, to feel something more for a guest? Was she allowed to feel this way? Zora didn't know the answers, and that frightened her. She tried to push the thoughts away, telling herself that she was just being foolish. John was a guest, and she was just a servant. That was the way it had always been. She had no right to feel anything beyond her duty to him. But every time he smiled at her, every time they talked, the feelings inside her grew stronger. She couldn't ignore them anymore. Zora walked through the quiet halls of the mansion, carrying a tray of food for John. She felt a strange heaviness in her chest, as though she was carrying a secret she couldn't share with anyone. The other maids were busy with their work, not noticing how Zora's thoughts were lost in the storm inside her mind. She had always been the calm one, the one who followed the rules and never asked for more. But now she didn't know what to do. As she entered John's room, she found him sitting by the window, looking out at the beautiful view of the gardens. He turned to smile when he saw her, and her heart skipped a beat. "Zora, you're here," John said, his voice warm and kind. "I was just thinking about our walk yesterday. It was nice to spend time with you." Zora placed the tray of food on the table, but she couldn't bring herself to look at him. The warmth in his voice made her feel both happy and uneasy. "It was nice," she said softly. "Thank you for inviting me." John stood up and walked over to her, his footsteps light. "I enjoyed our time together. You're not like anyone else I've met," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "You're special, Zora." Zora felt her cheeks flush. I don't know what to say," she whispered. She had always been taught to be humble, to never let anyone think she was important. But in this moment, with John's eyes on her, she felt something shift inside her. Could it be that he saw her as more than just a maid? Her heart began to race, and she quickly turned away, trying to hide the feelings that were growing inside her. "I should go," she said quickly, walking toward the door. "Zara, wait," John called after her. She paused but didn't turn around. "I know I've only been here a short time, but I feel a connection with you. I don't want you to leave." Zora's hands trembled, and her breath caught in her throat. A connection. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? She wanted to turn around, to face him, to tell him how she felt, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. The rules, the expectations, they were all so clear in her mind. She was a maid. She was here to serve, not to get involved with a guest. It wasn't right. I can't, Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. I have to go. Without waiting for his response, she rushed out of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what she was afraid of. Was it the feeling she had for John, or was it the fear of breaking the rules she had lived by her entire life? She didn't know. But what she did know was that her heart was torn in two. Zara went back to her room and sat down on her bed, her mind spinning. She tried to focus on her duties, to remind herself that she was just a maid, that she had no business feeling the way she did. But it was impossible. The feelings wouldn't go away. They only grew stronger each time she saw John. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Startled, Zara stood up quickly. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice shaky. "It's me, John," came his voice from the other side. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Zara's heart skipped a beat. Why was he here? What did he want? She didn't know if she could face him again, not with all the emotions swirling inside her. But before she could stop herself, she opened the door. John stood there, looking at her with those warm eyes. He seemed concerned, but there was also a softness to his expression. "I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable earlier," he said, his voice gentle. "I didn't mean to pressure you." Zara swallowed hard. "It's not that," she whispered. I don't know what I'm feeling. I've never felt this way before." John stepped closer, his voice soft, but filled with sincerity. "Zara, you don't have to be confused. It's okay to feel things. I just want you to know that I care about you. And I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this." Zora closed her eyes, her heart aching. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that things could be different, that maybe, just maybe, she could have something more with John. But she also knew the reality. She was a maid. He was a guest. There could never be more between them. "I can't," Zara said again, her voice filled with uncertainty. "It's not right." John reached out and gently touched her hand. "Zara, you don't have to follow every rule. Sometimes, the heart knows what it wants." Zara pulled her hand back, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She couldn't make up her mind. The struggle inside her was too strong, and she felt torn between what her heart wanted and what she had been taught her whole life. "I need time," Zora said softly. "I need time to think." John nodded, his face filled with understanding. "I'll give you all the time you need." As Zara closed the door behind him, she felt more lost than ever. The struggle inside her wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. A night in the garden. The evening air was cool, and the stars twinkled brightly in the sky as Zara walked through the garden. She had asked for some time alone, needing space to think after the conversation with John earlier that day. Her mind was still in turmoil, her heart pulled in so many directions. Zara had always been calm, following the rules that governed her life. But now, everything seemed uncertain. John had made her feel something she had never felt before. He treated her differently, with kindness and respect, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she shouldn't want this. She was a maid, nothing more, nothing less. There could be no future for someone like her and a guest like John. That was the reality she couldn't ignore. But as she wandered through the garden, her thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She turned around and saw John walking towards her, his face bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight. "Zara," he called softly, "I'm sorry to disturb you. I wanted to make sure you were all right." Zara felt her heart race at the sound of his voice. She had been hoping for some time to think, but now that he was here, she wasn't sure what to do. "I'm fine," she said quickly, trying to sound calm, though her voice betrayed the nervousness she felt. "I just needed some time alone." John stopped a few steps away from her, looking at her with concern. "I understand. I didn't mean to intrude, but if you don't mind, I'd like to walk with you. It's such a beautiful night." Zara hesitated for a moment. She had told herself that she needed space, but something in John's eyes made her want to spend more time with him. She nodded slowly. All right, a walk would be nice. They walked side by side through the garden, the flowers around them releasing their sweet fragrance into the cool night air. The soft sound of leaves rustling in the breeze added to the peaceful atmosphere. But despite the beauty of the night, Zara's thoughts were still filled with confusion. I know something is on your mind, John said after a moment of silence. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I can see that you're troubled. Zara stopped walking and turned to face him. She looked at him for a long moment, unsure of what to say. The words she had kept inside for so long seemed to be fighting to escape. I don't know what to do, she admitted finally. I've always been taught to stay in the background, to serve and never ask for more. And now, I don't know what I feel anymore. John took a step closer, his eyes filled with understanding. Zara, I don't want you to feel trapped by those rules. You are so much more than just a maid. You're kind, intelligent, and strong. You deserve to be happy, just like anyone else. Zara's breath caught in her throat. She had never heard anyone speak to her like this before. No one had ever made her feel like she mattered. She had always thought of herself as nothing more than someone who served others, invisible and quiet. But John made her feel seen. I don't know if I can believe that, Zara said softly, her voice trembling. I've been taught my whole life that my place is to serve, to never want anything more. I don't know how to change that. John smiled gently, his voice calm and reassuring. You don't have to change who you are, but you deserve to be happy, Zara. You deserve to have a life that makes you feel fulfilled, not just one where you give everything to others and expect nothing in return. Zara's heart pounded in her chest. She had never thought about her life like that before. Could it be true? Could she really want something more, something beyond serving others? Her mind felt torn between what she had always known and the new possibilities John was offering her. John reached out and gently touched her hand. The warmth of his touch sent a wave of comfort through her, but it also made her feel even more confused. You don't have to decide everything right now. Just know that I care about you, Zara. I want you to be happy. For a moment, Zara just stood there, her heart racing. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she could have a life that was different, that she could have more than just her duties. But the fear of breaking the rules, of stepping out of her place, held her back. I'm scared, Zara whispered. I don't know if I can let go of everything I've been taught. John's expression softened. It's okay to be scared. Change is never easy. But sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes we have to take risks to find what truly makes us happy. Zara looked down at their joined hands, the feeling of his touch comforting her. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but in this moment, standing in the garden with John, she felt something she had never felt before. Hope. The silence stretched between them for a few moments, the only sound the soft rustle of the trees in the wind. Zara finally took a deep breath and looked up at John. I don't know what will happen, she said quietly, but maybe I can try. John's smile was warm and full of understanding. That's all I'm asking for, just a chance to try. As they continued their walk through the garden, the weight in Zara's chest seemed a little lighter. The future was still uncertain, and she knew there would be difficult choices ahead. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't alone in her struggle. John was there, offering her a chance to be something more, to live a life she had never dreamed of. The night was beautiful, and for the first time, Zara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. A forbidden desire. Zara couldn't sleep. The night seemed longer than usual, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quiet. The garden walk with John had changed something inside her. The feeling she had kept buried for so long now felt impossible to ignore. She had never thought about love or desire. As a maid, her life had always been about serving others, never about herself. But John had made her feel seen. and that made everything different. When he looked at her, when he spoke to her, she didn't feel invisible anymore. But with those feelings came a new kind of fear, a fear that what she felt for him was forbidden. He was a guest, and she was just the maid. There was no place for someone like her in his world. Zara sat up in bed, pulling the covers tightly around her. She couldn't stop thinking about the touch of John's hand in the garden. It had been gentle, warm, and comforting, but there had been something else in his eyes. Something deeper, something that told her he felt it too. But how could she let herself believe that? How could she allow herself to feel something so strong for him when she knew it could never be? She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where they had walked just hours before. The moonlight bathed the flowers in silver, and the night air was still and peaceful. But inside her, everything felt chaotic. Her heart was torn between what she wanted and what she knew was right. She could never cross that line. It wasn't just the rules. It was the fear of what would happen if she did. But even as she told herself this, a part of her wished she could feel differently. She wanted to reach out to John, to let him know how she felt, but she couldn't. The consequences would be too great. She was nothing more than a maid. He was a guest, and their worlds could never truly collide. As if on cue, there was a soft knock at her door. Zara's heart jumped in her chest. She quickly wiped away the tear that had fallen down her cheek. She didn't want anyone to know how conflicted she felt. But when she opened the door, there he stood, John. His face was filled with concern, and his eyes softened when he saw her. "Zara, are you all right?" he asked gently. "I couldn't stop thinking about you. I wanted to check on you." Zara's breath caught in her throat. He was standing so close to her, his presence overwhelming her. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her voice trembled. "Just thinking." John stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't have to hide from me. I can see that something is bothering you." Zara swallowed hard. She wanted to tell him the truth, to admit that her feelings for him were confusing, powerful, and forbidden. But she couldn't. "It's nothing," she lied, trying to push past him. "I just need some sleep." But John didn't let her go. He gently reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Zara, please don't shut me out. I know something's wrong. I want to help." Zara's heart pounded in her chest, her emotions threatening to spill over. She looked down at their joined hands, feeling the pull between them. He was so kind, so gentle. How could she keep pushing him away? "I don't know what to do, John," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "What we feel, it's not right. You're a guest here, and I'm just a maid. There can be no more between us. I can't let myself feel this way." John's expression softened, but his grip on her hand tightened. "Zara, I don't care about the rules. I care about you. What we feel, it's real. I know it is." The words hit Zara like a wave, washing over her with warmth. But as much as she wanted to believe him, she knew the truth. They couldn't have a future. She was only a servant, and he was a guest. She couldn't let herself fall for him. She couldn't allow herself to dream of a life she could never have. "I can't be with you," Zora said, pulling her hand away. "It's not just about the rules. It's about who I am. I'm not someone who gets to have these kinds of feelings." John stepped back, his face a mixture of pain and understanding. "Zara, I don't see you as just a maid. I see you as a woman who deserves happiness. You don't have to hide from what you feel. You don't have to push me away." Tears filled Zara's eyes, and she turned away, unable to look at him any longer. "I wish I could believe that, but I can't change who I am, and I can't let myself want something I know will never happen." John didn't speak right away. He stood silently for a moment, and then he gently cupped her face in his hands, turning her to face him again. "Zara, I don't know what the future holds for us, but I can't pretend that what I feel isn't real. You're not just a maid to me. You're someone who means something to me. His words pierced through the walls Zora had built around her heart. She wanted to cry, to let herself feel the freedom he was offering her. But the fear was too strong. The fear that loving him would only lead to heartbreak. The fear that what she wanted was impossible. "John, please," Zora whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't make this harder for me." He didn't let go. Instead, he gently brushed his thumb across her cheek, wiping away the tear that had fallen. "I'm not trying to make it harder, Zora. I'm just trying to tell you that I care. And maybe, just maybe, you deserve to let yourself care too." Zora stood still, her heart torn in two. His touch, his words, they were both everything she had always wanted and everything she feared. She knew the danger of giving in to these feelings, but in that moment, she couldn't deny the truth. She wanted him, just as badly as he seemed to want her. But the reality of their worlds was too much to ignore. This, whatever it was, could never happen. Not in a million years. Taking a risk. The days after the conversation with John felt like a blur to Zora. She couldn't stop thinking about the words he had said, about the way he had looked at her with so much tenderness. It wasn't just his touch that had shaken her, it was his belief in her. He didn't see her as just a maid. He saw her as someone worthy of love, worthy of a life outside the rules she had always followed. But Zora couldn't forget the reality. She was still a maid, and he was a guest. Their lives were too different, and nothing could change that. She told herself over and over that she couldn't allow herself to fall for him. It wasn't just forbidden, it was dangerous. If anyone found out, it could cost both of them everything. Still, every time she saw him, that connection between them grew stronger. It was impossible to ignore. Every smile, every touch, made her heart race, and each moment of their time together seemed to make the walls she had built around herself feel weaker. One afternoon, after finishing her duties, Zora found herself in the garden again, where she had spent so many quiet moments thinking. She had been trying to focus on her work, to keep herself busy, but the thought of John was always there, like a whisper in the back of her mind. She was walking along the path when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw John coming toward her, his usual easy smile on his face, but there was something different in his eyes, something more serious. "Zora," he said softly, "I've been looking for you." Zora's heart skipped a beat. I'm here." "What's wrong?" John stopped in front of her, his expression calm but intense. "I need to talk to you. I know you've been avoiding me, and I understand why. But I can't keep pretending like nothing's happening between us." Zora's breath caught in her chest. She had tried so hard to avoid these moments, to push him away, but it seemed impossible. "John, I can't. We can't do this. It's too dangerous." John took a step closer, his voice low but firm. "I'm not asking you to do anything you don't want to, but I can't pretend I don't care about you anymore. And I know you care about me too." Zora closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that it was possible for them to have something real, but the fear of what might happen if they gave in to their feelings was too strong. "I don't know how to stop feeling this way," Zora whispered, her voice shaky. "But I don't know how to change my life either. I can't just leave everything behind." John reached out, gently taking her hand. "I don't want you to leave everything behind. I just want you to take a chance. We don't have to figure everything out right now, but we can't keep pretending that what's between us isn't real." Zora looked down at their joined hands, her mind spinning. She could feel the warmth of his touch, and for a moment, it felt like everything else disappeared. She had spent so much of her life following the rules, doing what was expected of her, but in this moment, those rules seemed so small. "I'm scared," Zora admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of what will happen if we do this, but I'm scared of never knowing what we could have." John stepped even closer, his face now just inches from hers. "I understand, but sometimes taking a risk is the only way to find out what's really possible. I don't want to live my life wondering what might have been. And I don't want you to either. Zara felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. He was right, in a way. If she didn't take this chance, she would always wonder what might have happened if she had let herself feel. The fear of the unknown was real, but so was the possibility of something wonderful. I don't want to regret this, Zara said softly, her voice full of uncertainty, but also a hint of hope. But I don't know if I'm strong enough to take that risk. John smiled gently, his hand brushing against her cheek. You don't have to do this alone, Zara. I'm here with you. We'll take this one step at a time. Together. For the first time in what felt like forever, Zara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. She didn't have to know all the answers right now. They didn't have to figure everything out today. All she had to do was take that first step. With a deep breath, Zara nodded. Okay, I'll take the risk, but only if we do this together. John's smile was full of warmth and relief. Together. I promise, Zara, we'll figure this out. One step at a time. In that moment, Zara felt the weight she had been carrying for so long begin to lift. She had made the decision. She was going to take the risk, to see where this connection with John could lead. The future was uncertain, and the consequences were still unknown. But she was no longer willing to let fear control her life. For the first time, Zara felt free to take a chance. As John leaned in and kissed her softly on the lips, Zara's heart fluttered with the sweetness of the moment. It was a risk, yes, but it was a risk she was willing to take. The future was still uncertain, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. All that mattered was the feeling between them, real, strong, and undeniable. A new beginning. The days after Zara's decision felt like a new chapter in her life. She had taken a risk that had scared her more than anything she had ever done before. But now, with John by her side, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. For the first time in years, she felt like she was living for herself, not just following rules and doing what was expected. John and Zara had started spending more time together. They took walks in the garden, shared quiet meals, and even talked about their dreams, their hopes for the future. With every conversation, Zara felt closer to him. She had never imagined that her life could change this much, but with John, everything felt different. He made her feel special in a way no one ever had before. One afternoon, as they sat together by the edge of the garden, Zara looked over at John. His smile was kind, and his eyes sparkled in the sunlight. There was no doubt in her mind now. She was falling for him, deeply, completely. And for the first time, she didn't want to fight it anymore. You make me feel like I can be more than just a maid, Zara said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. Before, I never thought I could be anything else. But with you, I feel like I'm finally seeing a different side of myself. John turned to her, his face soft with understanding. Zara, you've always been more than just a maid. You've always had a kind heart, a strong will, and a spirit that is impossible to ignore. I see that in you every day, and that's what makes me care about you so much. Her heart swelled at his words. It was as if the weight she had carried for so long was starting to lift. She no longer felt like she had to hide behind her duties or her fears. With John, she could be herself, and he saw her, truly saw her, for who she was, not for her title or her position, but for the person she was inside. I never thought I could feel this way, Zora continued, her voice trembling slightly. But now, I don't want to imagine a life without you in it. I want to be with you, John. John reached out and took her hand, holding it gently. Zara, I feel the same way. I don't want to imagine a life without you either. You're the most important person in my life now. I want to be with you too. In that moment, it was as if the world around them had disappeared. All that mattered was the connection between them. The fear that had once held Zara back was gone, replaced by the warmth of something new, something real. But even as they sat there, hand in hand, Zara knew that there were still challenges ahead. Their love was still something no one could know about, something they had to keep hidden for now. The rules of the house, the expectations of others, they would still be there, waiting to judge them. But for the first time, Zara didn't care about the rules. She cared about the love they shared and the life they could build together. She wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. She was going to fight for this, for the future they could have. Later that evening, after a quiet dinner, John and Zara walked back to the garden. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a soft light over everything. The flowers smelled sweet in the cool night air, and the stars twinkled above them. "I don't know what the future holds," Zara said softly, looking up at the sky, "but I'm ready to face it with you. Whatever happens, I know we'll figure it out together." John smiled, his hand resting on the small of her back as they walked slowly down the path. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said, his voice full of hope. "As long as we're together, I know we can handle anything." Zara looked up at him, her heart full of warmth. She had made the right choice. Taking a risk had led her to this moment, this beautiful, quiet moment with the man she loved. They stopped near the small fountain in the center of the garden, and John gently cupped her face in his hands. "I know this hasn't been easy for you," he said, "but you took a chance on us, and I'll never forget that. I'll never take it for granted." Zara smiled softly, her eyes shining with tears. "I'm glad I did, because now I know what it feels like to be truly happy, and it's because of you." John leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a soft, gentle kiss. It was a kiss full of promise, full of hope for the future. They pulled back slightly, their foreheads resting together, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. "You've given me a new beginning, Zora," John whispered, "and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that decision." Zara's heart swelled with love for him. She had taken the risk, and now she was starting a new chapter in her life, one that was full of possibility and hope. The past had been full of fear and doubt, but the future was full of love, and that was all that mattered now. Together, they stood in the moonlight, their hearts beating in sync, ready to face whatever came next. It didn't matter what the world expected of them. All that mattered was the love they shared, and with that love, anything was possible.